This is Arezki Daoud, Principal Analyst at risk assessment firm Arezki LLC, and I am also the editor of the North Africa Journal. Welcome to Arezki Podcasts, where we discuss the root causes of instability in Africa and in the Middle East. Welcome to this episode where I look at the big geopolitical events taking place in North Africa as of the week ending the 10th of June 2023. A separate report on the Sahel will be released shortly. So the week in North Africa ended pretty much where we left off in our last roundup of major political events in the region. Egypt is clearly stuck in a permanent cycle of repression against political opponents, while the economy has stalled. Events in Libya may be signaling some tiny positive evolution in the settlement of the political crisis there. In Tunisia, it's all about economic freeze that is making the country sinking into more uncertainty. In the west of the region, Algeria and Morocco continue to bicker over the Western Sahara, while in Morocco, King Mohammed VI appears to have resumed his royal duties after disappearing from public eye, raising questions about his ability to govern. So let me start with Egypt, where the authorities there launched a so-called national dialogue program on May the 3rd. The same week, 16 relatives of Ahmed al-Tantawi were arrested after he announced his presidential bid for the 2022 elections, prompting critics to denounce the National Dialogue Initiative as a public relations stunt. From my perspective, the simple fact that Egypt launched the initiative is right there a pure recognition that the political system there is broken. In fact, tens of thousands of political prisoners have been detained since April 2021, while 14 inmates have already died in custody. In recent weeks, arrests have become more frequent. During this week's arrests, police alleged that football fans belonged to a terrorist group and 9 others were allegedly kidnapped by the Egyptian security services while they were on their way to Ahmed Tantawi's office. Tantawi is an Egyptian politician who announced that he would run for president, hence challenging strongman Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So what's the takeaway for Egypt this week? Status quo again. The regime appears totally unwilling and unable to address not only the debilitating political crisis, but also the disastrous economic crisis. Given that the opposition has been largely neutralized, it will take Egypt a long time to find a new path of stability, and so we should expect bad news from Cairo as the year evolves. Let's go to Libya now, where a meeting in Morocco, representatives of the key Libyan rival factions have agreed on the legal steps to hold delayed elections. Libya remains, as you know, divided amongst a nominal interim government in Tripoli and another one in the east. The envoys of these rival groups have apparently struck a deal to ratify the texts of the accord, but no date has yet been agreed upon on when the vote may take place. I say apparently because in contemporary Libyan politics, nothing is final and every decision can change or simply abandoned at any time. But the agreement was set to be signed in the coming days between speakers Aguila Saleh and Khalid al-Mashri under pressure from the UN, whose envoy Abdoulaye Bathily has been calling for the rival administrations to agree on terms for elections by mid-June. So as for the UN, it has announced that it would work to help Libya's factions agree on contested points, preventing long-delayed presidential legislative elections. The UN Libya mission, known as UNSMIL, will facilitate a process to address the disputed elements of the electoral framework in order to reach a political settlement or agreement ahead of the potential elections this year, perhaps. The issues include candidacy of dual nationals and soldiers, as well as delay tactics, which prolong the stalemate in Libya. The UN appeal was supported by representatives from both the United States and the European Union in Tripoli. So what's the key takeaway for Libya this week? Well, we should be extremely cautious not to get too excited about the prospect of political settlement in Libya, but there is some hope. The firing of rival and hawkish Prime Minister Bashaga, who represented the East, is perhaps a good sign, but there's still far too many players active on the field, not only within the political elites, but even among the armed factions. There have been disagreements among armed militias that support the same group, that ended with deadly clashes, for example, in Tripoli as early as 2 weeks ago. Warlord Khalifa Haftar remains the top leader of the so-called Libyan National Army, and we're still concerned about the level of meddling from foreign governments. So yes, there are some positive movements, but there is a risk of stalled progress and long delays ahead. Now, shifting gear to the western part of North Africa, this week we note the start of the 19th edition of the African Lion International Military Exercise, held by Morocco and the United States for the first time. We note the presence of 12 soldiers and commanders from Israel's elite Golani Reconnaissance Battalion. Since normalizing the ties in December 2020, Morocco and Israel have been enhancing cooperation in various fields such as defense, trade, and tourism. The organizers of the drill say the 2-week event focuses on urban and underground warfare, containing exercises related to operational planning and weapons of mass destruction. But as you would expect, for neighboring Algeria to the east, the event is considered as another indication of Morocco's alleged efforts to undermine Algiers' position in the conflict of the disputed Western Sahara. As you know, Morocco claims the Western Sahara is part of its territory after Spain left in the mid-1970s. Algeria says it's up to the inhabitant of the Western Sahara to decide and has been supporting a pro-independence movement called the Polisario Front. Well, I did notice a U.S. delegation visiting Algiers before the exercise, most likely to ease Algiers' concerns. Algeria has ordered fresh military deployment on the Algerian-Moroccan border, a move reportedly recommended by Army Chief of Staff General Saïd Changriha, and then ordered by President Abdelmajid Tebboune. Algiers has been complaining about alleged incursions into Algerian airspace by Moroccan drones and aerial equipment. Now, for Morocco, needless to say that the drills involving such armies as the US and Israel are also meant to send an explicit message to Algiers that Rabat has the backing of two major powers should the crisis of the Western Sahara deteriorate and shift to a military confrontation. At the time, the Russian support for Algeria remains questionable and diminished by Moscow's war in Ukraine. So what is the key takeaway here? Well, the feud between Algeria and Morocco may be a small issue in relation to sort of the big global geopolitical crises. It's still a source of instability in the region that could transform into a potential war, though probably unlikely for the time being. Morocco is absolutely determined to score gains and get as many countries as possible to recognize its positions. Although it is scoring successes such as with many African nations, the United States, Spain, and others, there's still some heavyweight holdouts, in particular France, with whom Morocco has been having a tense relationship. France seems to have its focus on Algeria, given the various perceived benefits of such a relationship, including a large Algerian military, a lengthy border area with the troubled Sahel nations, and obviously the oil and gas reserves Algeria holds, seen by Paris as key factors for justifying preferred relations with Algeria for the time being again. The problem, though, is that the Algerian leaders appear unable to grasp the importance of France's support, as they have been attacking France for reasons that defy logic. For example, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune was slated to visit Paris this month, but the regime in Algiers has put forward conditions that the French government cannot fulfill. For example, that France would extradite Algerian political opponents living in France without respect for and consideration of the independent judicial system in France. The French government cannot disregard court decisions that protect Algerian political opponents, and sending them to Algeria without legal backing is a no-no. Also, Algeria has wanted France to stage significant events during the Algerian president's visit to grant him extraordinary status. For the regime in Algiers, such pompous events would have been used as a launching pad for President Tebboune's re-election bid for a second term next year, which would have been used for domestic consumption. Now, the latest news from Algiers is that instead of going to Paris, President Tebboune is considering going to Russia's St. Petersburg to attend an economic forum so as to snub Paris. Perhaps unbeknownst to them, the Algerian leaders are sending France straight to the arms of Morocco, whose leaders and state media would not hesitate to remind Europe that Morocco is a better partner. Or Algiers sees something that we don't see, I don't know. Now, staying in Morocco, there was an interesting shift in King Mohammed VI, who, after disappearing for a while from the public eye, he has suddenly been engaged in a flurry of public activities, perhaps in an effort to restore the authority of the monarchy. During the most recent Ramadan, he attended religious sermons, met with charities, and addressed issues such as water shortages. He inaugurated construction sites, he appointed new senior figures and senior officials, etc. So what's the issue then? Well, in 2022, the king spent 200 days outside Morocco, mainly in France and Gabon, raising questions among Moroccan commentators and the international press on his whereabouts and his capacity to govern. Several media outlets, strangely even in Morocco, where discussing the king is taboo and can land you to jail, have linked his absences with close ties to 3 German Moroccan brothers, 2 of whom are mixed martial arts stars and known for their lavish lifestyle. But there's still lingering questions as to why the king has given so much attention to the brothers. One of them, Abu Bakr Zaitar, apparently has had criminal convictions. While the king's return gives the makhzen, that is the administrative, political, and economic class supporting the monarchy, a breathing moment, the social and economic issues experienced by the Moroccan people remain a major concern. So much so that Sunday of last week, hundreds of people in Casablanca took to the street to protest against the rising cost of living in the country. The Democratic Labor Confederation Union organized a protest rally with attendees from Agadir and other cities traveling to the event. There have been scuffles between security forces and protesters, but the protests were largely peaceful and ended with no major incident. One of the thorny issues is the fact that the government has so far failed to raise the minimum wage, despite it, that is the government, signing an agreement with the labor unions last April to raise the minimum wages in both public and private sectors. There's also the recurring drought that has affected agricultural production, leading to a rise in the prices of food, fuel, and basic staples. So what is the takeaway here? Well, Morocco is not often in global news, certainly not as much as the Sahel, Tunisia, Libya, and even Algeria. It has been largely spared by controversy. Certainly, the local media remains anemic in its coverage of events on the ground due to fear of persecution. Nevertheless, Morocco will likely remain stable for the time being, although it will be confronted with the realities of an economy that is not sufficiently growing, a population that continues to make more demands, and a region fraught with peril and crises. Moving to Tunisia now, and we note that President Kais Saied has proposed last week taxing Tunisia's wealthiest as a way to avoid what he called the IMF dictates. An agreement was reached in principle last October on a $2 billion bailout package, but Tunisia remains uncommitted due to the conditions that IMF usually imposes on loan recipients, forcing them to restructure their economies that would have a disruptive effect on the social front, at least during the first years. Indeed, the IMF is demanding legislation to restructure over 100 state-owned companies that are heavily indebted. Kais Saied suggested taking surplus money from the wealthy to give to the poor, citing a quote attributed to Omar ibn Khattab, the second top leader of the Islamic Caliphate, ruling from 634 until his assassination in 644. So rather than lifting subsidies on basic goods, Saied proposed taxing the wealthy people. Tunisia's closest neighbor to the north, Italy, is clearly concerned about the stalemate, and so Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who recently met with Kais Saied, is lobbying for less stringent loan conditions from the IMF, largely to get Tunisia to focus on tackling the ever-growing migrant problem. Rome is considering organizing actually a conference to address illegal migration and to attract investment and encourage democracy and political stability in Tunisia. And with this quick roundup, thank you for listening. And until we meet next time, thank you for your time and goodbye. Thank you for listening. To subscribe to our podcast series, please visit mea-risk.com/audio. That is mea-risk.com/audio to find out more. If you are interested in a 6-month trial for our critical incident awareness and notification system, please visit shield-alert.com. That is shield-alert.com. Until our next podcast, thank you and goodbye.